everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of our 2019 season here at Purgatory Ironworks. Thank you guys for showing up. Today we're going to continue following along in the book, Trenton's Guide to Love, Riches, and Blacksmithing. On page 60, we're going to be working on our first project, which is going to be the incredible tent stake. Tent stake is an awesome project for you to get started on. It will teach you bending and also drawing and tapering. I'm going to show you guys how to do your draw and taper, and then a couple different ways to do your bend. It's not an overly complicated project. It's a great way for you to get started. The stock is 1/2 inch square stock, and the great thing about this is if you get good at your tent stakes, you can actually sell these at a reenactment. If you do Boy Scouts, if you end up doing things and the reenactment and things, tent stakes are something that can sell for $3 or $4. And it's really hard to screw up a tent stake. So it's one of those foolproof things you can get very good at pretty quick, and there should be absolutely no problem. So, but a couple things. Man, I gotta tell you, this past weekend I went to the Madison Conference in Madison, Georgia, which is a biannual, I'm not sure if it's a biannual, semi, once every 2 years is how that festival goes. And it was pretty amazing. It was the first time I really got to go to a blacksmith kind of socialized event. Met some absolute legends. Clay Spencer, who's been making the tire hammers in Alabama forever and a day, got to shake his hand, got a picture with him. The absolutely legendary Mark Asprey, along with a host of other folks that I have had correspondences with on the internet but have never met in person. It was pretty freaking awesome. And again, I have to make a special shout out to Mr. Andy at Big Blue Hammers, who gave me this awesome dog-faced hammer. And I'm not usually a big dog-faced hammer fellow. Shut up, kitty, I'm trying to be famous. But this was pretty cool, and so they were up there selling not only their hammers here, but also their utility hammers, and they also have a really awesome press that they're coming out with. And here's the thing, I actually got to work on a Big Blue press when I was filming Master of Arms, and after it worked so well, I came home and built my own. So I have a big debt to pay to the Big Blue folks up there. So Mr. Andy, thank you very much for the hammer. It is super, super awesome. But all things and everything aside, I want to tell you guys, starting off, one thing that I really haven't talked about as you guys have gotten started into your work is this little stuff right here, which is known as plastiline. So the great thing about plastiline is you can buy this at Hobby Lobby, Michael's, any of your art supply stores. And this is basically a non-drying clay. It's very stiff, and this is great for practicing when you don't have steel and fire. This stuff reacts very much like steel when it's hot. So every time that I teach a class, I will always have a bit of this because I'll let the students actually work on this before I let them work on steel. So one thing I suggest to you before you just bust out and go run out there on the forge and start hammering away, get you a little bit of plastiline. It's like $2 a block, and one block will do just about everything that you need. Give all these techniques I'm going to show you a try in plastiline first, and then actually go into steel. It makes a really big difference. But all of that out of the way, let's talk about our tent stake. So you can see this guy is rather simple. There is a taper here on the end, and you've got a bend on the other side. Now, one of the things I will point out is that in reenactment circles, I see a lot of tent stakes that are made out of round stock. In general, this is a bad idea that I have found. If you're going to make tent stakes, it's always preferable, at least in my case, to make it out of square stock. So, because here's what happens. If you see round tent stakes, the head of them are always bent way over, almost like a staple. They're almost a complete U shape. And the reason for that is when you drive a tent stake into the ground, the rope's going to catch it here. And the problem is that if there's winds or it's not exactly where it needs to be, that rope will cause it to twist left and right. Because it's a round shank, a round tent peg will turn and release the rope. The only way that you solve that with a round tent peg is the fact that you actually drive that son of a gun all the way into the ground, basically using it as a fence staple and just way into the ground. Now, we down here live in Georgia with red clay. I'm going to tell you something. If you drive a tent stake of this size into clay, you better pray to God it rains between the time that you set up and the time that you go home, or you will never get it out. So many times a tent stake will get stuck in the ground because people driving it so far in there. The great thing about the square tent stake is the fact that when you drive it in, it won't twist. So if you need to leave a couple of inches above the ground, I mean, you know, you can feel it getting tight, it's not going to be a big problem, and you can actually get the damn thing out when you're ready to leave. So again, I'm a big fan of square stock for tent stakes. As in the book, the call outs that we have here, this is 1/2 inch square hot rolled in 14-inch lengths. This will yield a 12-inch tent stake with a 2-inch crook, and again, pretty self-explanatory. But the one big thing I want to start off with is going to be actually that taper. A lot of people don't know how to properly do a taper, and your brain kind of has to adjust to how we're going to do it. Because if you see a nice point, like this guy right here, now this is like really super sharp for a tent stake. This is like a vampire hunting tent stake. The problem is one of my apprentices did this, and for a tent stake, you don't need it that sharp. But what happens is, especially for beginners, instead of working just on the end, because you're used to working in like construction paper in 2 dimensions, there's a tendency to try to work this entire area, not just the tip, but this entire area to get that smooth. To make a proper point, without getting it too long, the area of this work is simply on the tip. It extrudes, so you're just kind of working that front edge. So I'm going to pop this bad boy in the forge. I'm going to bring it up to heat, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So let me get this stuff out of the way. Now I had wanted to actually use one of our dirt box forges, but of course we've got our classes coming up, so I've got all those bad boys loaded up. So we're going to use one of our custom Purgatory Ironworks gas furnaces. Now this is the moment of truth where I see if my product blows up on camera or not. Alright guys, we've got a good heat right here, and what we're going to start off with is I'm going to take my bar and I'm going to do 2 things. One, you can see that's laying flat. I'm actually going to raise this just a little bit, and my hammer blow is going to fall like this. See, I'm not killing it, I'm rotating. Now I'm only taking 3 or 4 blows before I rotate. Don't want it to get too far out of whack. That's a pun, out of whack. Now, you can see we're developing a good tip, but what's important, again, is the hammer is not flat. It's actually tilted on an angle, and so this piece is also lifted. Now, we're going to run into a problem real quick, because if I want to get a sharper tip on here, at some point when I start hammering, the hammerhead is going to hit the anvil before it's going to hit the work. So the way that we're going to solve this is I'll put this back in the fire. Then we're going to come to the edge. I'm going to push this piece to the edge, not off, but pretty much right up to there. And now I'm going to do the same thing, but because it's on the edge, the hammerhead can actually fall below the level of the anvil, and we can make that nice point. So let me take one more quick heat, and let's go ahead and finish up this point. Here we go. We're going to lay it to the edge of the anvil, and once again, just continue what we were doing. But notice I am working right on the tip, that I'm really not moving up the bar at all. I'm just focusing on that tip. And you can see it looks really good. Now make sure that we're straight. And this is where you can do a little bit of adjustments to line it up. But there you have a nice tent stake tip that isn't too long for the vampire hunting. So a couple things though. One, again, pay very close attention that I simply worked on that leading edge. I wasn't working back up toward the top of it. That's where most of your beginners are going to make a mistake, and that's where you end up with like a needle point. So ideally, when you get comfortable with this in 1/2 inch, you should be able to draw this point in 1 heat. Now I took 2 because I want to take my time and explain everything. But ideally, when you become proficient with doing a tip like this, it should take you 1 heat. So, Now, let's take this bad boy. It is time to flip it around and actually get our bend. And there's a couple different ways that we can do this bend. You can use the anvil itself and the horn. You can actually use a vise, or you can actually use a special jig. And the good news is I'm going to show you how to do all three. Blacksmithing is all about the tooling, period. There are many things that you can get by with just using a hammer and anvil. But if you look around even in my shop, we have special tools for everything. I mean, that is the absolute heart of the industry, is that tooling. If you have somebody that gets a really nice piece of equipment like a power hammer or a press, just the standard dies don't work. Tooling really makes the items. So I'm going to show you how to get by on the anvil. But if you're going to be doing a lot of these, if you're saying, hey, I'm going to start making hardware to sell and make a little bit of money, you're going to need tooling and jigs. So let me walk you through which ones you can use. Just take one more heat, and then we're going to come to the anvil itself. Now, before I get started, I'm going to do something that you should do as well. Make a 2-inch mark on the top of your anvil. Break your soapstone, that's very important. What that does is that actually gives me the mark where I know I need to start bending my particular tent stake. So, let me grab our piece. And you can eyeball this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this piece on my mark. I'm going to make a little ding right there. And then I'm going to come over to the edge of the anvil and I'm going to start striking it here and here to bend it over that edge. Notice how close the blows are into the edge. I'm not way out here and I'm not way back here. I'm right over that square edge. It's going to tend to move out of shape very easily. So what I'm doing is making sure and keeping it flat and square. And you can now see we have a right angle bend. Now, it's kind of wonky, y'all. So what I'll do is come back up on the top of the anvil, flatten it out. It moved out of square just a little bit. So we'll come back. And there you go. So again, when you get good at this, this should be a one heat operation. Now, of course, we need to actually bend it just a little bit more. We're going to go over to the horn of the anvil for that. But once again, if you're proficient at this, you should be able to make your right angle bend and then go to the horn in one heat. So I am going to take another heat right here, and I got to reposition the camera because I want you guys to see here on the horn of the anvil how we're going to do this. Again, this is going to be kind of freehand. And the problem with that is it's not going to be consistent, but you can do a good enough job for tent stake. Again, it's real tough to screw up a tent stake. So take one more heat and let's look at our anvil horn. We have a nice heat, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the smallest portion of my anvil here, and now I want to hit on this bottom side. You can see how that is bending. Now you also see how the shank's wanting to bend a little bit too. So what you want to do is, again, hook it over that anvil and come back right here and give it just a little bit of a straighten. Again, something around a 45-degree angle is good. You can even freehand it just a little bit if you want to. Make sure it's straight. You can see I got a little bend to the right. I kind of like some other things. So let me pop this, straighten that out for neatness' sake. And there you go. You have the top end of your tent stake. So there it is. One professional grade 1/2-inch thick tent stake. So this was all freehand over the anvil itself, but I want to show you two more methods on how to actually bend these in a better fashion. Now, if you upgrade your equipment and you end up with a post vise like what I have right over here, a post vise is a pretty handy item to be able to make a tent stake with. It's pretty quick. You actually lock this piece into the vise and simply bend it over. So let me get another hot rod and I'll show you exactly how we do that. You can see where I've made myself a 2-inch mark right here. So what I'll do is, again, get an eyeball right there, make myself a little bit of mark. And to use the vise, it's pretty simple. What you want to do is you take that mark, take this piece, set it in the vise right here, just like that, lock it in, and then you can actually contour the top of the tent peg to the edge of the vise, and it does a pretty good job of actually getting the bend that you want on that end of it. And you see that's a lot more controlled, a lot faster than the other piece. So this is where tooling really makes a big difference. So obviously, being able to use a vise with that tool is really quick and really simple, and that's one of those great things about, like I said, getting better tooling. You can do specific jobs much more efficient, and the great thing about that is it also makes you able to do it profitably. If you have to spend 30 hours making a few tent stakes, you're not going to make any money. However, if you can slap it in the vise, a couple of quick hits, and you've got a $4 tent stake, you can actually turn a little bit of profit on that end of it. But for most of the time when we make our tent stakes in the shop, we actually made a special tool. It's a hardy tool, so it fits in the anvil, and it's this guy right here. Now I know it's kind of weird looking, but what you can see is that there is a stem on the bottom of it for actually going into the anvil, and then this is just cobbled together out of a bunch of different crappy pieces. But what's important is this slot actually allows ½ inch to go in here, and we have this angle piece so that when you take a tent stake, you can simply slip it into here, holds it very firmly, and you can bend it over to the side. The advantage of a tool like this over the vise is that you don't have to lock it in. You don't have to spend that extra time being a little clumsy trying to lock it right where you need it. You just kind of pop it in there, you can see your mark, and away you go. So let me heat up a piece and I'll show you how this works. But again, this is actually designed to fit this anvil, so it'll be pretty cool. Now, one other reason that's kind of twisted, kind of weird, is because you want to be able to get to this side. So when this goes in, the front edge of this is actually designed to make sure that it falls off of the side so I can get to hammering it. If it was straight in line with the anvil, I wouldn't be able to get my hammer there very effectively. So this kind of hangs off the edge of the anvil. So think about these things. You get a fire going. Just as before, we have a good heat. I can actually measure my 2 inches on here. This piece goes in right there. And again, just by pushing it to the side, it locks it in. Just a little flattened, and you can see that is pretty much perfect. I think one of the biggest mistakes a lot of beginners are going to make is that they've got, they want to do everything with very little. The credible thing about blacksmithing is that even something as simple as a tent stake, you can do a lot of tooling for this to make it fast. The difference between a profitable smith and somebody who doesn't make money is simply how fast and how well you can get something done. And at the end of the day, it is all about your tooling. So you can get by with a myriad of different things. You can get by with a piece of railroad track anvil. You can get by with a ball peen hammer. But there are things that objectively are far better to use. And I hope that these jigs show you exactly how that works. We're gonna wait for this damn car to come by. A beautiful take. And then the car has to come by. It's ridiculous. Anyway, so guys, that is going to be your first project out of Trenton's Guide to Love, Riches, and Blacksmithing, available on TrentonTide.com. I thank you again to all my Patreon supporters and all you guys out there that have been with me for years. Thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you guys right here next time at Purgatory Ironworks. You guys be good.